Published 2013 Est. The 8th of November 2017. Updated 0427 Est. The 9th of November 2017. EU leaders are preparing for the collapse of Theresa May's government by Christmas after Priti Patel became the second cabinet minister to resign in a week. The International Development Secretary, once tipped as a Tory leader, was forced to quit the cabinet last night after failing to tell Theresa May the truth about her secret dealings with the Israeli government. Amid farcical scenes, Ms. Patel was ordered to fly home to face the just 12 hours into a tour of Africa, and just 2 days after she was reprieved by Mrs. May, she quit in a short meeting with the PM in Downing Street. But in her resignation letter she issued a thinly veiled warning that she could challenge the government from the backbenches over Brexit, as allies argued she had been treated harshly. European leaders are now said to be readying themselves for Mrs. May's fragile government to fall within weeks. Priti Patel was taken away from Downing Street from the back gates after resigning from the government last night. Downing Street published the exchange of letters between Ms. Patel and Mrs. May last night. Ms. Patel's departure follows Sir Michael Fallon's decision to quit as Defence Secretary last week, over accusations of misconduct against women. The government was already being propped up on the slenderest of margins by the DUP, and question marks are still hanging over the futures of further frontbenchers in Boris Johnson and Damian Green. Brussels is now braced for the PM being ousted by her party, or for another general election bringing Jeremy Corbyn to number 10. One European leader told The Times there is the great difficulty of the leadership in Great Britain, which is more and more fragile. Britain is very weak, and the weakness of Theresa May makes negotiations very difficult. In her resignation letter, Ms. Patel indicated that she could be a thorn in the PM's side over Brexit, writing, "I will speak up for our country, our national interests and the great future that Britain has as a free, independent and sovereign nation." Her departure came just a week after the resignation of Defence Secretary Sir Michael Fallon over allegations of UAL harassment. Mrs. May is expected to carry out another mini-reshuffle this morning to replace Ms. Patel, a prominent Brexiteer. The reshuffle is likely to be complicated by Mrs. May's desire to retain the delicate cabinet balance on Brexit. Ms. Patel entered the famous building by the back door shortly after 6 p.m. before the fateful talk with Mrs. May. Ms. Patel was driven away through the gates after drawing a line under her time as a minister. Theresa May, pictured arriving in Downing Street tonight after her regular aunt's with the Queen, has summoned Ms. Patel for showdown talks in an extraordinary day in Westminster. A series of fresh revelations sealed Ms. Patel's political fate as it emerged she had held another undisclosed meeting with the Israeli Public Security Minister. It was also claimed Ms. Patel had visited an Israeli field hospital in the Golan Heights. Despite it being widely regarded as illegally occupied, thousands tracked the progress of Ms. Patel's flight home via a website, with TV news helicopters following its arrival. A furious row broke out over whether Downing Street had been aware of any of Ms. Patel's controversial meetings, and whether it was number 10 who had told her to keep them quiet. There was speculation a reshuffle could see the promotion another pro-Brexit MP, such as Penny Mordaunt, Theresa Villiers or Dominic Raab. In a letter to the Prime Minister last night, Ms. Patel offered a fulsome apology to you and to the government for what has happened. In her reply, Mrs. May made clear she would have sacked Ms. Patel if she had not resigned. She wrote, "Now that further details have come to light, it is right that you have decided to resign." Putting a brave face on it, Priti Patel was all smiles as she arrived back in Downing Street tonight for her meeting with Theresa May. "Dear Prime Minister, it has been a tremendous privilege to serve in your cabinet since you became Prime Minister in July 2016. During my time as Secretary of State for International Development, I have been proud to work alongside you, colleagues in government and our partners across the world to support the poorest and most vulnerable people in the world. It has been a privilege to preside over a department which has a team of remarkable individuals who often face adversity and danger in tough and challenging circumstances. Our teams across the world are displaying the ingenuity of the human spirit every single day as they strive to save lives and give vulnerable people new opportunities. I have seen at first hand the refugee camps and the projects we support across the world. Seeing how the aid and support provided by this country is transforming and saving lives is truly remarkable. These are experiences that I will never forget and will forever inform my views and outlook on the world. In humanitarian crises and natural disasters, along with volunteers and charities, the department staff are amongst the first on the ground, courageously acting to save lives by providing food, medicines and shelter. The human decency, compassion and commitment they show is simply awe-inspiring, and they are a credit to our county. Our actions to reform the global aid system, invest in new projects that deliver better outcomes and support economic development will make a lasting positive difference to the poorest in the world. I have seen the very best of Britain and know it will flourish on the world stage as we leave the European Union. We should all be very proud that across the world the Union flag on our aid parcels and on the projects we support is seen as a symbol of hope. Our country is a force for good in the world, and as Secretary of State for International Development it has always been my focus to act in the best interest of our great country. In recent days there have been a number of reports about my actions, and I am sorry that these have served as a distraction from the work of the Department for International Development and of the government as a whole. As you know from our discussions, I accept that in meeting with organizations and politicians during a private holiday in Israel, my actions fell below the high standards that are expected of a Secretary of State. While my actions were meant with the best of intentions, my actions also fell below the standards of transparency and openness that I have promoted and advocated. I offer a fulsome apology to you and to the government for what has happened, and offer my resignation. From the backbenches I will take an active role representing and speaking up for the good people of the Whittam constituency. I look forward to highlighting the great entrepreneurial spirit in this part of ES that has created new jobs and growth, and to take my campaigns for new investment in infrastructure and services to the floor of the House of Commons. I will continue to support you and the government and stand up for the conservative values of freedom, opportunity and aspiration. I will also speak up for our country, our national interests and the great future that Britain has as a free, independent and sovereign nation. I wish you and the government all the very best. With all good wishes. The RT Hum Priti Patel MP. Miss Patel's downfall followed extraordinary revelations last week that she held a dozen secret meetings with senior Israelis, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, during a family holiday in August. In a major breach of protocol, Ms. Patel took no officials with her to the meetings, at which no minutes were kept. Instead, she was accompanied by Tory peer Lord Pollack, honorary president of the powerful lobby group Conservative Friends of Israel. During Clear the Air talks in Number 10 on Monday, Ms. Patel promised the Prime Minister she had revealed everything about her secret dealings with Israel. But to the irritation of Downing Street, it emerged the following day that she had proposed diverting British aid money to fund the Israeli army's humanitarian activities in the Golan Heights, a disputed territory which Britain has not recognized since it was annexed by Israel 50 years ago. But Downing Street continued to say the PM had confidence in Ms. Patel as late as 4:30 p.m. on Tuesday. The plane carrying Ms. Patel arrived back in London from Nairobi at around 3 p.m. today. Ms. May's patience finally snapped on Tuesday night when she learned that Ms. Patel had held another undisclosed meeting with Israeli Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan in Parliament on September 7. Tory Grandee Sir Desmond Swayne dismissed suggestions that a second cabinet resignation in a week would be a catastrophe. There are 22 cabinet ministers and there are plenty of people who are talented to step into their shoes, he said. It will not be a huge destabilization. Several allies of Ms. Patel pleaded for clemency. Speaking ahead of her dismissal, former Foreign Office Minister James Duddridge said she had been a fabulous minister who deserved to be let off with a second reprimand. Former UKIP leader Nigel Farage tweeted, "Resignation by Priti Patel is very sad. SHE's a good woman and a leading Brexiteer in the cabinet. The latest departure will inevitably heighten the sense of chaos engulfing the government, as Mrs. May desperately tries to get a grip on a bewildering array of crises." Her deputy Damian Green is being investigated over harassment allegations, while Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson faces demands to resign over loose comments that might double the jail term for a British mother in Iran. To make matters worse, the Prime Minister herself is also facing questions amid claims she spoke to Ms. Patel about her meeting with Israeli Premier Benjamin Netanyahu as long ago as September. The Jewish Chronicle claimed No. 10 asked Ms. Patel not to include a meeting with Foreign Ministry official Yuval Rotem in New York in September in her list of disclosures. Downing Street is also said to have been made aware of Ms. Patel's meeting with Mr. Netanyahu shortly after it happened, despite a spokesman telling journalists this week that they were unaware until last Friday. In the most explosive allegation, it is said Mrs. May spoke to Ms. Patel in advance of the UN General Assembly and they discussed the ministers' meeting with Mr. Netanyahu, as well as the details of Ms. Patel's plan for UK aid to be shared with the Israelis. Mrs. May is said to have agreed the idea was sensible but needed sign-off from the Foreign Office, but a No. 10 spokesman said it is not true that the Prime Minister knew about the International Development Secretary's meeting with PM Netanyahu before Friday, November 3. It is equally untrue to say that No. 10 asked DFID to remove any meetings from the list they published this week. Dear Priti, thank you for your letter following our meeting this evening, confirming your resignation as Secretary of State for International Development. As you know, the UK and Israel are close allies, and it is right that we should work closely together, but that must be done formally, and through official channels. That is why, when we met on Monday, I was glad to accept your apology and welcomed your clarification about your trip to Israel over the summer. Now that further details have come to light, it is right that you have decided to resign and adhere to the high standards of transparency and openness that you have advocated. As you do so, you should take pride in what you have achieved as Secretary of State. You have ensured that the UK aid budget continues to deliver value for money for British taxpayers, in support of our national interest, while helping some of the world's most vulnerable people. The reforms to which you secured agreement at the high-level meeting in Paris last week are just one recent example of this. Under your leadership, the Department for International Development has increased its work on economic development, including on trade, helping developing countries to lift themselves out of poverty and creating the trading partners of the future. I also welcome your efforts on the global health agenda, notably as co-host of the Family Planning Summit in London this summer, and DFID's work in leading the humanitarian response in the overseas territories affected by the recent hurricanes in the Caribbean, and responding to the refugee crisis in Burma and Bangladesh. Through this work and more, you have helped to ensure that, as the UK leaves the EU, we build a truly global Britain. You rightly take pride in being the first British Indian cabinet minister, a significant achievement which follows your work as Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury and Minister of State for Employment, and your years of service to your constituents in Whittam, whom I know you will continue to serve with great commitment and devotion. August 1325, Priti Patel meets a dozen senior politicians and officials while on family holiday to Israel. They include Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu. She is accompanied by Tory peer Lord Pollack for all but one, but the encounters are not known to the UK government beforehand. She also reportedly visited an Israeli military field hospital in the Golan Heights, a disputed area that Britain does not recognise. September 7, Ms. Patel meets Israeli Minister for Public Security Gilad Erdan for talks in the House of Commons. September 18, Minister meets Israel's Foreign Ministry boss Yuval Rotem while in New York at the UN General Assembly. September, Ms. Patel and Mrs. May are alleged to have discussed her meeting with Mr. Netanyahu while at the UN in New York. Downing Street denies the conversation happened. November 3, Ms. Patel publicly admits to holding secret meetings with a range of Israeli politicians and officials after reports emerge. No. 10 says Mrs. May was only made aware of the Netanyahu meeting on this day. November 6, Ms. Patel concedes that further meetings took place in Israel, including with Mr. Netanyahu, and clarifies previous comments. November 8, the PM orders Ms. Patel to return from Africa tour after more illicit meetings emerge. Ms. Patel's resignation was announced after a 33-minute showdown with Mrs. May in No. 10. Ms. Patel narrowly avoided the sack following the initial wave of revelations after the PM decided she could not risk destabilizing the government further after Sir Michael Fallon quit over UAL harassment claims last week. But Downing Street's stance changed yesterday after it emerged that Ms. Patel had tried to divert some of Britain's aid budget to humanitarian work by the Israeli army in the disputed Golan Heights. Britain accuses Israel of occupying the territory illegally. It was revealed that on September 7, Ms. Patel met Israeli Minister for Public Security Gilad Erdan for talks in the House of Commons. Then, on September 18, she met Israel's Foreign Ministry boss Yuval Rotem while in New York at the UN General Assembly. DFID said it was not aware of the Erdan meeting until Tuesday night, and there were no UK government officials present. Ms. Patel was largely hidden by umbrellas as she took to the tarmac, and was then driven away in a ministerial car. Priti Patel was driven away in a ministerial car after arriving back at Heathrow today. Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, pictured in Washington tonight where he is meeting U.S. politicians on Capitol Hill, was unaware of Ms. Patel's meeting before they happened. Ms. Patel's undeclared meetings while on holiday in August included one with Yair Lapid, leader of Yesh Atid. Pictured the Rotem meeting was known about on Monday, but was not disclosed on the list because that only covered the period when Ms. Patel was on holiday. Ms. Patel met both Erdan and Rotem over the summer, and met them again in September. Number 10 dismissed the idea that Ms. Patel had been asked not to disclose the September encounter with Rotem for fear of embarrassing the Foreign Office, pointing out that he had featured on the list anyway. The backlash against Ms. Patel reached boiling point on Tuesday night, with sources at the heart of government saying no one, least of all the Secretary of State herself, is pretending she handled this well. Tory MPs had refused to come to her aid during a common statement on her conduct in which she faced renewed calls to resign. Yotam Paliza, of the Israel Aid Organization, which Ms. Patel met, said the meeting had been arranged 2 weeks in advance, suggesting it was fixed before she left the UK. Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported that Ms. Patel also visited a military field hospital in the Golan Heights, where Syrian refugees were being treated. The British government, along with most of the international community, does not recognise the territory, which was captured in 1967, as belonging to Israel. Protocol dictates that visits there are not hosted by Israel. Aid Secretary Priti Patel was summoned back to the UK from Nairobi for a showdown with Mrs. May, dropping plans to fly to Uganda with Trade Secretary Liam Fox. She is pictured on a previous foreign trip. Ms. Patel had been due to fly on to Uganda with International Trade Secretary Liam Fox. Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu was in London for talks with Mrs. May and to mark a century since the Balfour Declaration. Mrs. May did not know of the meeting between Mr. Netanyahu and Ms. Patel during the talks. Labour claimed Ms. Patel was guilty of 4 separate breaches of the code and called for her to resign. Kato Samor, the party's international development spokesman, said it is hard to think of a more black-and-white case of breaking the ministerial code of conduct. But rather than change the minister, the Prime Minister somehow decided the code itself needed changing. Thousands of people led the progress of Priti Patel's flight from Nairobi as she flew back to Britain under orders from Prime Minister Theresa May. Following the news of Ms. Patel's return, website FlightRadar24 reported on Twitter that more than 22,000 people were tracking the Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner's flight on its site, although it was not absolutely certain Ms. Patel was aboard the KQA-100 Kenya Airways flight to Heathrow. Usually flights on the website are tracked by 1 to 200 people. Users on Twitter compared it to O.J. Simpson's attempt to outrun police in his car in 1994. Ms. Patel was absent from the Commons during questions about her conduct because she was flying to Africa. Instead, Middle East Minister Alistair Burt was sent in to explain her conduct. He told MPs that Ms. Patel had tabled proposals to use aid money to assist the humanitarian work of the Israeli Defense Force in the Golan Heights, adding that it had been ruled out immediately by the Foreign Office as not appropriate. Manuel Hussassian, the Palestinian Authority's ambassador to the UK, described the revelations as shocking last night and questioned last night why Ms Patel made no effort to balance her meetings by talking to them. Shadow Aid Secretary Kato Moore said Ms Patel should either be sent for a formal investigation or do the decent thing and resign, but Mr Burt claimed they were not particularly secret meetings and insisted if I were on a visit to Israel I would have wanted a schedule just like this. He did however admit he would have told Britain's Israeli ambassador had he planned such a schedule. Mrs May's official spokesman confirmed the issue of a field hospital was discussed by Ms Patel in her meetings. He said the Secretary of State did discuss ways to provide medical support to Syrian refugees who are wounded and cross into the Golan Heights. Lord Stuart Pollack is a political veteran and political networker who has spent his career pressing the case for greater ties with Israel. Born in Liverpool and still a keen supporter of the Reds football club, as a child he was a chaplain helping to lead services at his local synagogue. He made his first educational trips to Israel from the age of 15 and carved himself out a career fostering closer relations between the UK and Israel. He served as an officer for the Board of Deputies of British Jews in the 1980s before joining the Conservative Friends of Israel (CFI) in 1989. Under his leadership the CFI became one of the biggest lobbying groups in Westminster, throwing dinners and events for hundreds of important guests and developing contacts in the corridors of power. Lord Pollack told the Jewish Chronicle in 1990 that he was motivated by a desire to put as much as possible back into the community but also admitted he is as ambitious as the next man. In 2015 he was made a peer by David Cameron and happily accepted the peerage, describing the honour as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. On accepting the peerage he stepped down as CFI director but continued as the group's honorary president. The Israeli army runs field hospitals there to care for Syrians wounded in the civil war. There is no change in policy in this area. The UK does not provide any financial support to the Israeli army. Mrs May's spokesman insisted Ms Patel was absolutely clear in her meeting with the Prime Minister on Monday. He said the new revelation was not a surprise to Downing Street and no policy change had been made. The spokesman added the Secretary of State has been clear with Number 10 that on no other occasions while a minister has she organised meetings with a foreign government minister outside the normal channels while on holiday. As the extraordinary row broke on Monday, the International Development Secretary blamed her enthusiasm to engage for her failure to Mrs May. Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson about the dozen high-level encounters, as well as saying sorry for the stunning breach of protocol. Ms Patel was also forced to make an humiliating clarification of comments last week in which she appeared to deny there were any more meetings to disclose. Ms Patel said in a statement on the DFID website, "This summer I traveled to Israel on a family holiday paid for myself. While away I had the opportunity to meet a number of people and organizations. I am publishing a list of who I met. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office was aware of my visit while it was underway. In hindsight, I can see how my enthusiasm to engage in this way could be misread, and how meetings were set up and reported in a way which did not accord with the usual procedures. I am sorry for this and I apologize for it. My first and only aim as the Secretary of State for International Development is to put the interests of British taxpayers and the world's poor at the front of our development work." Mrs Patel was accompanied by a Tory peer, Lord Pollack, who set up the meetings. The statement released by DFID on Monday suggested Mrs Patel had started to shift policy following her visit. Penny Mordaunt is regarded as the favourite to take over from Ms Patel. Penny Mordaunt is regarded as the front-runner to take over from Priti Patel when the seemingly inevitable sacking happens tonight. The Minister for the Disabled was hotly tipped to take over when Sir Michael Fallin was forced to quit as Defence Secretary last week. But Mrs May chose to promote close ally Gavin Williamson instead, infuriating some Tory MPs. As a prominent Brexiteer, 44-year-old Ms Mordaunt's appointment would not upset the delicate balance in the cabinet between Leave and Remain ministers. Other names in the frame include Business Minister Margot James, 60, who is widely respected. However, she has not previously reached Minister of State level, and was a Remainer before the referendum. Sports Minister Tracy Crouch, 42, is seen as a prospect for promotion. Education Minister Anne Milton, 61, would also be a popular choice among fellow MPs and is seen as a safe pair of hands. Unusually, she did not say publicly which way she voted on Brexit. DFID Minister Alistair Burt was sent to the Commons pictured to defend Ms Patel in her absence yesterday. He said the aid secretary was in the air as he explained her absence on her return from Israel. The Secretary of State commissioned departmental work on humanitarian and development partnership between Israel and the UK, and on disability, it said. The statement also clarified two quotes given to The Guardian last week in which the minister sought to dismiss the row. Nadeem Zahawi, who sits on the Foreign Affairs Committee, told BBC Newsnight the outcry over the trip has been drummed up. The backlash over Priti Patel's secret meetings in Israel is part of a plot to oust Brexiteers from the cabinet, a Tory MP has claimed. Nadeem Zahawi, who sits on the Foreign Affairs Committee, said the outcry over the trip has been drummed up. And he said calls for Boris Johnson to quit as Foreign Secretary over his gaffe about a British mother in an Iranian jail was also part of the same plot. Mr. Zahawi told BBC's Newsnight this is not an enemy state that she was somehow having clandestine meetings with. The Foreign Office knew during the trip she was having these meetings. Yes, the ambassador should have been there. SHES already admitted the mistake of not following procedure and apologized for it. I somehow feel that some of this stuff is being drummed up because both Priti and the Foreign Secretary were big beasts in the Brexit campaign, and some Labour Remainers and others who think if we can take out some of these beasts and derail the government then maybe we can actually do a U-turn on Brexit. She was reported as saying that Boris knew about the visit, but embarrassingly conceded today this quote may have given the impression that the Secretary of State had informed the Foreign Secretary about the visit in advance. The Secretary of State would like to take this opportunity to clarify that this was not the case. The Foreign Secretary did become aware of the visit, but not in advance of it. Mrs. Patel also admitted that a quote in which she insisted the stuff that is out there as it was lacking in precision. This quote may be read as implying that the Secretary of State was saying that the meetings that had so far been publicly reported were the only ones which took place on her visit. The statement said, the Secretary of State would like to take the opportunity to correct this impression. She is clear that other meetings also took place on her visit, in addition to those which had been publicly reported at the time of her making these statements. The FCO are clear that UK interests were not damaged or affected by the meetings on this visit. The backlash over Priti Patel's secret meetings in Israel is part of a plot to oust Brexiteers from the cabinet, a Tory MP last night claimed. Nadeem Zahawi, who sits on the Foreign Affairs Committee, said the outcry over the trip has been drummed up. And he said calls for Boris Johnson to quit as Foreign Secretary over his gaffe about a British mother in an Iranian jail was also part of the same plot. Mr. Zahawi told BBC's Newsnight this is not an enemy state that she was somehow having clandestine meetings with. The Foreign Office knew during the trip she was having these meetings. Yes, the ambassador should have been there. SHES already admitted the mistake of not following procedure and apologized for it. I somehow feel that some of this stuff is being drummed up because both Priti and the Foreign Secretary were big beasts in the Brexit campaign, and some Labour Remainers and others who think if we can take out some of these beasts and derail the government then maybe we can actually do a U-turn on Brexit. Abandoned ship Sleaze probe Minister Damian Green poses with a lifeboat as May fights to keep government afloat. Sleaze probe Minister Damian Green posed with a lifeboat today as Theresa May struggled to keep her government afloat. The PM's deputy took part in the unwise photo opportunity as the government was buffeted by a string of crises, ranging from UAL allegations to illicit meetings with foreign politicians. Sir Michael Fallon's career as Defence Secretary came to an abrupt end last Wednesday, after he admitted his behaviour towards women had fallen short of standards. Deputy PM Damian Green, who is under investigation by the Cabinet Office, posted a picture of himself being shown a lifeboat in Murray. Mrs May has already lost Sir Michael Fallon pictured front row, third from left from her cabinet, while Priti Patel pictured right of middle row has now gone, and Priti Patel was axed last night after more details emerged of a swathe of unauthorized meetings with Israeli politicians while she was on a family holiday last summer. Mr. Green is under investigation by the Cabinet Office over allegations he made a clumsy pass at a Conservative activist, and sent her a flirty text message. He has also furiously denied separate claims that police found extreme but legal on his office computer in 2008. The minister yesterday posted a picture of himself being shown a lifeboat in Murray.